Hello, welcome to a special edition of the Right Wing Populist podcast. I am the Right Wing Populist. So today we have a debate. We're going to debate about whether or not Kamala Harris would have been a better president in terms of the economy, many other things. But before we get into it all, I need you to do something for me, folks. I need you to subscribe, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this beautiful podcast. Please subscribe. I would so appreciate it. And if you are listening on the YouTube's like and comment, it helps a great deal with the algorithm. I would so greatly appreciate it. And before we get into this debate, and my debate partner will be his name. Is mine using your name? Is that okay?
I've been on this podcast before.
Nick. Okay, his name is Nicholas. He's going to be my debating partner. But before, I just want to touch on one thing about the war. It does look like negotiations in Pakistan are going forward with J.D. Vance, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and the Iranians. And I'm not that optimistic about it. I think it'd be crazy for Trump to restart the war. It looks like he's trying to get Israel to stop attacking Lebanon. But, Israel, they love violating ceasefire, so I'm not too optimistic about that, but we'll see. But I have a little confidence in Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff because, in my opinion, they're just basically Israeli agents. Luckily, Vance is there, and I do think Vance will be representing the interests of the United States. So we'll see what happens. I just want to touch on that very quickly. But that's not the main point of this podcast. The main point is, like I said, we're going to have a debate about whether or not Kamala Harris would, again, be a better president in terms of the economy and other things than the current president we have, Donald Trump. And I'm going to let my debate partner start off the conversation. So if you don't mind, go ahead, Nicholas.
Okay, so we are going to have this conversation/debate. Just a reminder to the audience, I was on this podcast a couple months ago when we had a debate about the main causes of the Ukraine-Russian war. Anyway, putting that aside. Well, first off, we've been about almost a year and a half into Trump's second presidency. He's done some very major policy decisions. Obviously, the most recent one is starting the war in Iran. Obviously, now we have a shaky ceasefire. But many of the audience already know the consequences of that war. Much higher gas prices. Many banks and other economic think tanks have really dramatically risen their inflation outlook for 2026 and even early 2027 as a consequence. Because even if the war ends, the supply of oil is going to be constrained for a while. And then, of course, we have the massive tariff regime that Trump did quite erratically throughout 2025, with the main brunt, but not the entirety of it, done in April. I do have some data I want to just articulate. Now, of course, the data itself is going to have to be dissected, right? Because there are different causes or at least several variables. But just on the surface level, we can compare some of the economic data in 2024 to 2025. Okay, so we've had some of the most recent GDP revisions for Q4, and then of course we also have Q3, Q2, and Q1 for 2025. I'm sure many of the audience know gross domestic product. It's not a perfect measurement of the economy, but it's a relatively good one. Tracks the amount of activity, how many goods, services are being purchased. Usually 2% is a decent GDP number, 3% is good or even great. Anything beyond 3% is amazing, and of course below 2%, you're looking at mediocre to bad. So the annual GDP in 2025, so this is the GDP for the whole year, not just one quarter, was 2.1%. In 2024, it was 2.8%. So it is interesting, we saw a 0.7 percentage decrease from 2024 to 2025. Now, I'm sure people will debate about the several causes, but it is worth noting that many economists and many studies have shown that broad tariffs tend to be negative for growth. And of course, we saw a massive spike in the tariff rate in 2025. And of course, in that year, we saw a corresponding decrease in our gross domestic product. Thought that was worth noting. Our annual non-farm payroll growth in 2025 was approximately 181,000. To put that in perspective, in 2024, it was roughly 1.5 million. So quite the decrease. Now, of course, some of that's due to a labor supply issue, or not even issue, but a lack of new immigrants, illegal and legal, in the country. But it's also a demand problem, not just a labor supply problem, because the unemployment did drift up in 2025. Do you have any comments? I don't want to talk too much, Chris, if you want to.
No,
interject?
you get a few more
Okay,
minutes
that's fine.
if you want.
So what that means is the average job growth per month in 2025 was only 15,000. Okay. And if you look at the average job month post Liberation Month, okay, it's about 2,000, essentially zero. I mean, that's such a small number that it's practically a hair's breadth away from being literally zero on net. This is, of course, net job growth. So after Trump's so-called Liberation Month, this is the cornerstone of his economic agenda. I mean, there are other things too. The Doge cuts was played a role. Obviously, incredibly restrictive immigration policy, for better or for worse. But really, the tariffs, that were the main thrust of his so-called plan to save the American dream and economy, make America great. And after that massive announcement, we saw job growth go basically to zero on net for the rest of the year. That should cause people, if you are a populist or you are someone who really believes Trump was the better economic choice, that statistic should really make you pause and just double think, double check your assumptions. One last thing, and then I want Christopher to interject because we can talk about how we could look into more whether it's a causal effect. In the first 4 months of 2025, January through April, I've done the math, I checked this up on the government agencies, Bureau of Labor Statistics, etc. The average unemployment for those 4 months, so the average UR rate, unemployment rate, was 4.15%. Okay? Post those 4 months, so this is May through December 2025, the average unemployment rate was 4.33%. So in other words, an increase of more than 1.5%. So what I'm trying to articulate is that the economy clearly deteriorated a lot more after the major tariff announcements, and some of them stuck, some of them didn't. We'll get into that. And we also know, according to some surveys by the Atlanta Fed and Kansas City, many employers / businesses, when surveyed, said they were going to cut back on hiring. On some of them said 13%, others said 16%. We can bring up the exact figure if we want. And one of the main reasons they cited in the survey was because of the tariffs and tariff uncertainty. So we have some evidence that it's not just mere correlation, though such a severe correlation should be a red flag in itself, but also of a causal link. But I don't know if you want to respond.
Okay, yeah, you spoke on, I think, for over 6 minutes. I'm going to respond to some of this. Number one, let's remember that Joe Biden basically had a recession during his presidency, the Biden-Harris economy. So if you're going to compare Kamala Harris being better for the economy, they were awful for the economy. But he had 2 quarters of consecutive negative GDP growth. And I looked it up. That's from, just cite the sources, that is from the Foundation of Economic Education. So there was a technical recession under the Biden-Harris, and this wasn't like in the middle of COVID. We were getting out of the COVID at this point, so that's not a valid excuse. So if you're going to say that Kamala Harris would have been better for the economy, I would assume she'd be similar to the Biden administration. Maybe you never know. I'm not a big fan of these type of discussions, but you never know. But for the purposes of the discussion, if we're going to have it, I don't think that's an unfair assumption. They were not good for the economy either. And if you look at the job numbers for the last 3 years, and we'll see what happens this year, but for the last 3 years from 2023, 2024, 2025, you've seen job creation go down consecutively. It didn't just start with the tariffs. This has been a problem for the last, arguably 4 years, but certainly the last 3 years. Now, I'm not blaming Biden for all the economic problems he faced. He did inherit a tough situation. But the reason why there was so much job growth in his first year was because, as Trump unarticulately put it, let's say, but they were basically bounce back jobs. They were jobs that were forced to be shut down by COVID. And the real reason I would argue we've had so much economic problems is not because of the tariffs. That's not the significant factor. Again, the lack of job creation has been an issue for the last 3-4 years, not the last 6 months. That's just a misleading framing if you look at the last several years. It's because and Trump does bear some responsibility for this, so I'm not trying to say there's no fault. But if you're going to talk about the tariffs specifically, it's because you made a very stupid decision. These were mostly Democrat governors, but Trump went along with it at the beginning, was to shut down the economy basically because of a bad flu season. I mean, you look at the actual death rate of COVID, it's not that much worse than the flu. It is worse, but it's not that much worse. And we should not have shut down the economy over COVID. That was a huge mistake. And Trump did promote that at the beginning. I'm not trying to say he doesn't deserve any blame for it. But by April and certainly by May, Trump was saying we had to reopen the economy. But mostly Democrat governors, some Republican governors, but many Democrat governors kept their economies closed, I think, for political reasons. You could argue Trump wanted the economy open for political reasons too, because he wanted to win the election. But I think Trump was right on the merits regardless of politics. We should not have shut down the economy. And I don't think we've ever fully recovered from this ridiculous situation to shut down the economy over the flu. And again, if you look at the job numbers, this has been a problem for the last 3-4 years. It's not just a problem with Trump, and it's the whole reason Trump got elected again in the first place is because the Biden administration so mishandled the economy. If you look at the amount of spending with their bills, what was the Build Back Better bill? That's a big reason why you had inflation in the first place. And another argument against your tariffs, but I mean the fault of everything, is we have not seen a massive increase in inflation at all under since Trump's back, since he's implemented the tariffs back. Mostly, I think they were in April when he implemented most of the tariffs. I mean, they fluctuated a bit over the months, no doubt. But you have not seen the mass. In fact, inflation's actually gone down. Core inflation's actually gone down, which is not to be expected.
I don't mean
So,
I don't mean
go
to
ahead,
interrupt.
say something.
Are you talking about the core PCE inflation or CPI?
CPI.
Okay.
That has gone down. It's actually down a little bit over the year as
Mhm.
opposed to 2024. Now, that's not to say he's implemented his tariffs perfectly. He has not. Okay, I agree with you about the uncertainty. That was not a disciplined way of implementing tariffs. But like Nicholas, the problem with your argument is, again, if you look at the 3-year picture, you can't just blame it on the tariffs. In fact, tariffs don't seem to be a big reason at all. We have structural issues with the economy that started way before the tariffs. It started under the Biden administration. That's when you really started seeing the weakening of the economy after many of the jobs came back, bounce back jobs. It's continued. Trump has not made it that much better, but if you're just going to talk specifically about, and I don't want this debate just to be about tariffs, but if you're going to focus as much on tariffs as you did, I think the broader context is more important for the audience, that this jobs issue did not start with the tariffs. That's just misleading. Unemployment did not dramatically increase with the tariffs. It's been pretty steady. And I think trying to frame it as just an issue of the tariffs is misleading, but you can respond to that if you'd like.
Yeah, you said a lot of interesting feedback, so I'll try to just address as much as I can reasonably. For starters, when you say the job growth was starting the issues of job growth were starting years ago, it is true we've seen some declines, but it's a massive difference in 2025.
That's not true.
You see a
It's not a
gradual
massive-
decline because once we open up from COVID, employers really overhired because there's a lot of pent-up demand. But most economists, for instance, Mark Zandi from Moody Analytics has said this. You can listen to his podcast he has with his co-hosts on Moody Analytics on Spotify. Most economists, and self-included, seem to think full employment, in other words, the most healthy employment range you would expect from a economy where people who want a job can get a job easily, is 4%. So yes, we were at 3.5 at one point because we opened up from COVID. So yes, you'd expect to see some slackening. But we did peak at 4.5% in November 2025. And right now we're hovering between 4.3 and 4.4. It changes every month of 2026. So we are, employment-wise, above the ideal target, right? So there has been clearly some softening of labor demand.
4.4% unemployment is not that
No, it's not bad in a vacuum, but
and it's
obviously
not that dramatically different than it was when Trump first got back into office.
Depends how you define dramatic. 4%, 4.4, 4.3, 4.5. They're noteworthy. And also part of the reason why the unemployment rate isn't higher now is because we've actually seen a labor force decline the last few months. So in other words, and this is according to Mark Zandi from Moody Analytics, people can criticize it, but it appears to be valid. If labor force had been the same today as it was when Trump took office, we'd probably see unemployment above 4.5%.
I don't. That may be true, but I think, frankly,
So there has
I think
been
that
a
argument's
real-
probably true throughout most of the last 5 years because of COVID. A lot of people stopped looking for jobs just because of the COVID situation. So I'm not saying that's wrong, but a lot of times that argument can be made in bad faith. I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay.
That's what the argument people made about the Obama administration, Republicans. Well, people are just not looking for jobs. That may be true, but if you just look at the rate, which is what we can verify, I don't know. I don't think you actually know either.
Okay.
It's not that dramatically
I
different.
do want to
And then
address
start
some
with
of your
tariffs.
criticisms of the previous administration.
Sure.
Number one, you didn't mention it, but I do want to mention the audience. Obviously, Joe Biden was too old to be president. He had real cognitive issues. I'm not a doctor, but I advocated before the debate. My friend here could, we talked about this before, he could verify. Before the public debate he had with Trump, I was saying he should drop out, blah, blah, blah. But putting that aside, we can still look at the administration as a whole and see how they function. On the technical recession claim, this is a minor thing. It doesn't necessarily change his point too much. There was a revision to where one of those quarters was slightly positive, like 0.1. That's still essentially zero,
That's
though.
not what this article says here from the Foundation of Economic Reform. They don't say it was revision
Yes,
positive.
well, again, well,
So I don't. That might be true.
do you know when that
actually.
article is dated? It could be that I'm out of date or that's out of date.
I think 2023. This was about the year.
If it's from 2023, there's a decent chance that's a bit out of date.
Oh,
but
well,
that's
look,
okay.
if you're disputing that, fine. I mean,
But
I
it
don't
doesn't
know.
really matter because practically your message is saying GDP for a stretch of time was very poor, which is true, right? So it doesn't necessarily
Okay.
matter
Well, I'll correct that later if I
too
can.
much. What I'm trying to articulate, though, is
I don't know that. I mean, I'm not, just to be clear for the audience. If that's true, I apologize. That's not the article.
It's not a big deal because a difference of 1/10 a percentage point isn't necessarily fatal to your argument.
Okay.
It's just something to note.
Okay, I don't want to be
But
dishonest.
during that time period, employment was still pretty strong. So there are two ways to define recession. There's the rule of thumb that many people use: 2 consecutive negative quarters of GDP.
That's a classical definition.
Sort of. Then there's the NBER.
You learn about that in college, I think.
You learn a lot of things. I know. And then there's the
I think that's
NBER definition, which they try to factor in other things than just GDP, like employment. The reason why is you can imagine, say in the future, AI automates a bunch of jobs, unemployment spikes incredibly high, there's almost no job growth, but GDP could be just blasting.
Sure, but if you have 2 negative quarters of GDP, that's not a good sign for the health.
It's usually not a good sign. But again, if you're trying to look at the economy as a whole picture,
GDP does take into account many different. I mean, it's not.
it's not. Yeah, kind of.
I agree that employment matters. Also, inflation matters. I think that's. But I mean, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
No, it's okay. What I'm trying to say is like 2025 had the worst job growth, excluding the COVID pandemic. If you exclude that, had the worst job growth since the Great Recession. Okay, but GDP was not amazing, but it was okay. It was 2.1%. Definitely a slowdown from last year, but it just goes to show you that GDP, it's a decent tool, but it should never be used as a replacement of these other labor statistic tools or even things like inflation.
Job growth the last 3 years has been awful in the history.
That's really not true. It wasn't.
Is true.
No,
2024 was not a good year. It was not a good year at all for job growth.
How are you defining a good year for job growth?
Well, I've read,
what's
it was
the
one of the
metric
weak. I
for
mean,
you?
like I don't remember all the details. It was one of the weaker years that we had.
1.5 million is not certainly not gangbusters, but compared to 2025,
I don't remember
it's hard to
the
say
exact
it's
number,
bad.
but the amount it was
Yeah.
pretty much within trend of what you were expecting based off the rate. I don't agree with you. I don't accept the premise that it was dramatic.
In 2023, we had several million jobs added. In 2024 is 1.5, a real decrease for sure. And 2024 was the 1.5 million. In 2025, we went to under 200,000. That is a decrease of over 1 million jobs.
But Nick, hold
I mean,
on.
that's just a massive
That's a
increase
similar
in the
rate
rate.
from the decrease from 20. If you look at the amount of jobs that was lost, that's a similar rate. That's my point. It's a similar rate.
Name me a job.
Wait, Nick, hold on.
Yeah.
You just have to emphasize this.
Okay.
Based on the numbers you just cited, that is a similar amount of jobs lost. It's a continuum of a trend. You just made my point.
Okay. Well, why don't we look up the annual job growth for 2023 compared to 2024?
Okay, I'm just basing it off the numbers you said. And
Okay.
you can do that. But the other thing, and while you're doing that, the other point I want to make is about the Biden administration is you had obviously the massive spike of inflation. And again, if you want to talk about comparing it to the Biden, assuming Harris would have governed like Biden, which we don't know for a fact, that's an assumption. But for the purpose of the conversation, I think we can assume that they were awful on inflation. They did a terrible. Remember, it was they called it transitory. They said the inflation was going to be transitory. It wasn't so transitory. It's still impacting us, unfortunately. And I'm not just blaming the Biden administration. I think obviously COVID's a big reason why you had the inflation. But they also had massive spending bills that made the inflation worse. When you have an issue with inflation, having massive spending bills
Trump
like
sent massive stimulus checks in COVID too. They're the same.
No, but he wasn't president at that point. I'm not just trying to blame Trump for it. But some of this stuff wasn't just for COVID stimulus.
Trump,
infrastructure bills.
Trump spends all the time in his administration. He did massive stimulus bills when COVID
Inflation
happened.
is not the problem it was when Biden was in office.
No, but I'm trying to say is if you look at the actual spending between Trump and the Biden administration, there isn't a massive difference. That's just not true.
Yeah, but the
Just so you
inflation.
know.
Yeah, but inflation's not an issue. It was now like it was back then.
No, but I'm trying to say is that if you put Trump and Biden, is that Trump
And
had
I'm not sure
won.
that's
If
true.
Trump had won in
Actually,
2020, you wouldn't expect any big difference in
I don't think.
spending.
I don't know if that's. There were this bunch of infrastructure bills that
Okay.
Trump would not have. I don't think
Real
Republicans would
quick,
have signed.
I'm trying to look up the sources here. Google's AI says there's 2.7 to 3 million jobs annual in 2023. I'm trying to see if there's any other sources. So it was a good amount of jobs. Let me double check. 2024. It was
Look.
1.5, I believe.
Okay, well, I don't want us to be the podcast to be us rumbling through poorly written statistics. Not taking a shot. It's just I understand trying to find the data. The point is, I just don't think the economy was Nicholas. The whole reason Trump got elected again, given all the crap that he's done and said and all the controversy, is because the Biden-Harris administration did not do a good job with the economy. That was the number one issue. And especially if you're going to compare Trump's first term, it's not even close. Trump's presidency was far better than Biden. If you're just comparing his second term, in my opinion, has been more of a disappointment. So that's a much harder argument. But certainly, if you look at his first term, it's not even close. It's why the decision to vote for Trump compared to the Harris made so much more sense because Trump's first term was so much more successful than Biden-Harris's term. And that's why Trump won. Now, I understand your point about the tariffs. Just to wrap up the tariff point, unless you want to, I'll give you the last word on this. I understand the point about the tariffs. Trump did not do, and I do think one of the reasons for the weaknesses since April was in part tariffs. I don't want to be disingenuous, and I do not approve of how we handled it. Okay, going back and forth, being petrified by the stock market and its reaction. The stock market was never going to react favorably to tariffs because they're not the ones who benefit the tariffs. In theory, it's supposed to be the working class. Whether or not you agree with that premise, it's fine, but that's at least the purpose in theory. So I agree with you. The way he handled it was so poorly. But again, I think if you look at the trend over the last 3 years, putting the tariffs as the main reason, is disingenuous. We have structural problems with the economy. I think largely having to do with our handling of COVID. And I'm not just blaming Biden for that or Harris. Trump was the president for that first year of COVID. He made mistakes too, but Trump was right to not want to keep the economy closed. It was the Democrats who wanted it closed. They're the reasons I think fundamentally why we have these weaknesses. Not Trump and the Republicans. Now go ahead.
A couple things. So the main drivers of inflation, by the way, the inflation we saw during the Biden administration was present worldwide, which actually weakens your argument that the Biden administration had a unique responsibility for it. Because if it was the case that it was more so the Biden administration's incompetence that led to the inflation we saw, we wouldn't expect it to be so widespread on a global stage. So there were several main reasons for the inflation. Not the only reasons, but the main ones.
COVID was
There was the oil shock from the war in Ukraine, lots of sanctions on Russian oil, so that caused gas prices to spike up very high.
Which they mishandled, the Biden administration.
I don't agree,
they could have
actually.
stopped that war from
and
happening.
unlike Trump, Biden didn't initiate that war. Trump initiated the Iran war. That's causing the current oil spike. So just an interesting thing to comment on.
That's a separate conversation.
Number two, we had a lot of stimulus money that was sent out because of the lockdowns during the pandemic, which also happened in other countries. And then as a consequence of the lockdowns, we had a lack of supply of goods. So when things opened up, the supply took some time to catch up with the pent-up demand, which of course will lead prices to be higher. So I want to ask you, let's say Trump had stayed in office in 2020, right?
Successful January 6th, anyone? A successful
President 2021 to 2025, right?
Yeah.
Do you think the inflation would have really been dramatically different?
Well, I don't think caveat, let's just assume Republicans had kept the Senate, because if Trump was the president, obviously there was 50 for the Senate. If Trump's president instead of Biden, Republicans control the Senate. I don't think they would have passed some of these spending bills, Build Back Better. There was another big spending bill that the Democrats did. I don't think Republicans would have done it. They just don't have, Republicans are not big on, Republican spending is just basically cutting taxes, and they don't have enough money to pay for the programs they've already committed to. But in terms of the spending, I don't think they would have passed some of these spending bills at the Biden administration. They passed massive spending bills. And politically, it ended up helping them, obviously, because they got their asses kicked in 2024. But I think that contributed to the inflation. In terms of Russia-Ukraine, I'm a little bit less sure about it now because I think obviously Trump's been unsuccessful in ending that conflict. I think partially because it got to a point where Russia has no real incentive in ending it. That might be changing a little bit now. But I have to think that Trump would not have allowed that to happen the way the Biden administration.
It's not really up to him to
That's
allow
not true.
it.
No,
Putin
that's
was
not
gonna
true.
do it.
That's not true. Trump had better relations with Putin than the Biden administration did. I think at the very least Putin would have waited or tried to negotiate something with Trump, and I think Trump would have been much more open to it.
No.
Biden was not open to it at all.
Putin hasn't taken negotiations with Trump seriously at all.
Biden never even met with Putin when the war happened.
Putin hasn't taken Trump's negotiations seriously at all.
He's met with Trump.
Along.
Biden didn't even try to meet with him.
He's met with him. Nothing has changed on the ground with the war.
Well, nothing has changed on the
utterly
ground.
ineffectual.
Yeah, right, because I don't
There's
think
no reason to think that would have changed if he had been president.
No, I don't think.
Back
I
then.
think Putin. Well, I do think now there's no incentive because they're winning. Although it's more of it's they're winning, but they haven't accomplished much the last.
It's a very
almost
very
year at
slow
this point.
win. Yes,
It's been. It's a little bit. I don't want to get sidetracked on it, but
Yeah.
I agree with that in part. But I don't. I mean, the Biden administration didn't even try. They were so hostile toward the Russians. They weren't even talking to them. You know, there was reporting, and I don't know if this is true or not for sure, but that Ukraine and Russia were in talks, but you had people from the U.S. and the U.K. basically told Ukraine, you have to fight. And the war happened. I don't think Trump would have done that. I agree with you that Trump did a lot early on to give Russia a lot of capital, I think, as a goodwill gesture to help wind down the war. That hasn't happened. I think there are people in Trump's administration, this isn't a defense of him, this is an indictment of Trump because he appointed these people. I do think there are people in the administration that have mixed motives on Russia-Ukraine. But I think at the end of the day that the war probably wouldn't have happened then. So I do think the prices wouldn't have happened. The increases
No, it's
related
just the
to
evidence
war.
isn't there. Again, Putin has strung Trump along his entire
But he had a better
second term.
relationship with Putin, Trump
He
or
hasn't-
Biden.
Better?
Yeah.
I think on a personal level, Trump does, but that doesn't mean he actually influences Putin's behavior.
Who-
There's no evidence. There's a difference between having a good personal relationship and actually being able to influence someone's actions.
Did Putin invade
There is no
Russia?
evidence.
Did Putin invade Ukraine when Trump was president?
No.
Did he when Obama was president?
He did part of it, yes.
And did he when
annexed
Biden was
Crimea.
president?
Yes.
Okay.
What's your point?
My point is that there's
Has he
actual
stopped the
evidence
war?
that Trump's
Has he stopped the war in Trump's
the evidence,
president?
no, he hasn't, but the war already started. My point is that Trump has. I think there's evidence based off Trump's first term, which was undermined because of Russiagate, unfortunately. But Putin was willing to. They had better relations, generally
Okay.
speaking, than the Democrat administrations between Trump's first term. And I think that matters. And I think for you to be so dismissive of that
Okay.
shows.
Where are the results, though? If this hypothesis was true, we'd expect to see some actual results after nearly a year and a half of this war with Trump being president.
Well, he's
talked with Putin multiple times.
It's true.
He's met with them, had a whole summit.
It's true.
There's been extensive, extensive
the Ukrainians
diplomatic
aren't helping.
efforts by Trump to try to get Russia to negotiate a settlement, a ceasefire, a peace deal, whatever you want to call it. And nothing's happened, Christopher.
Well, we've
Nothing
talked
transpired.
about this on our
So
first
if that
debate.
hadn't happened, if we
Yes.
didn't have that data point, your argument would be clearly stronger.
Okay.
But we do, which
Okay.
suggests that Trump is not effective at getting Putin to change his actions or to
No.
influence his actions.
Look. I think I agree, especially the first 3 months of Trump returning to office, that if Trump had been very disciplined, more disciplined than he is, unfortunately, for whatever reason, his age or just his personality, he could have gotten a deal done, and unfortunately he didn't. But I also think, Nicholas, it's a little bit disingenuous comparing Trump trying to end a war when he got back into office in 2025 as opposed to stopping a war from actually happening. At this point in 2025, you can make an argument that Russia had no real incentive besides trying to be on Trump's good side. It's like they don't have much of an incentive at that point, which is why I think Trump early on was trying to be so warm toward the Russians by kicking out Zelensky, normalizing relationships, trying to make sure Russia was no longer a pariah in the international scene. That was a lot of goodwill gestures. It hasn't worked, but I think that's more of the face that Russia doesn't have the incentive. And I think they would have more early on.
I don't think Russia had the incentive when they first invaded Ukraine either.
Okay.
Okay.
I disagree with that, but that's okay. But look, I agree. Look, it's a fair point. Trump has not been successful at ending the war, and he promised he would. I don't want, for the people listening, I don't want to defend Trump from that aspect. I think it would have been.
You
less
should never
likely
promise to end a war when there's two parties, especially if you're not in the war directly. It's not something you can promise.
Hey, man, he creates the standards of which to grade him.
Politically, yeah, it's.
But I do think the war would not have happened if Trump had won.
But I want to be clear too that the war in Ukraine was not something the Biden administration initiated. The war in Iran is something Trump directly and clearly initiated. So the inflation that we're probably going to see later this year can be attributed completely fairly to Trump.
Well, the inflation report came out, the monthly, I think, report came out today, and it was not good.
Yeah, that was before the war, though.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's actually
I thought it was for March. I thought the March.
well. The thing is, it was up to like March 10th or March 15th.
Oh, okay.
So that data, you're really not going to see much.
Point is, I
effect
agree
at
with
all.
that.
So what I'm trying to, so that actually makes it even more concerning how this is going to go out in the future.
Oh, I agree. Look, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess we don't want to get bogged down on the Russia-Ukraine stuff, but again,
No, I like
don't.
comparing it to Iran. I think that's fair.
I don't see the evidence that Trump was going to be a master negotiator with Russia had he been in office during the initial starts of the Ukraine war.
Right.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is we know Trump has a tendency to spend a lot of money. The stimulus money is just trying to do these tariff checks. The only reason why he didn't do them probably is because Congress he needs congressional approval, and they're not so stupid as to do that. He's not a kind of person who's afraid to spend money. So this idea that somehow inflation would have been dramatically different, again, we would have still seen the war with Russia-Ukraine. There wasn't going to be some sort of magical deal-making Trump could have done to avoid that. We also know that the supply issues from COVID were going to happen regardless if Trump has stayed in office or not. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Chris, you're so quick with the tariffs to try to say, oh, that's not the cause, you can't blame Trump, even when we have surveys.
Not the main cause. Not the main cause.
Not a big cause, I should say, yes. Even when we have surveys from businesses themselves stating that some of the reason why they're cutting back on hiring is due to the tariffs. Also, if we look at the Kansas City study, they estimate, based on their calculations, 19,000 jobs less a month because of the tariffs. That's only up to August.
Can I just say something very briefly, and I'll let you finish?
Sure.
I agree with I'm not disputing, again, about the tariffs and uncertainty. I would argue that was more about the fear-mongering from all the economists, and there's going to be massive inflation. You're going to have all these the lack of, what's the word? Lack of, I'm blanking on the term. But I think a lot of the fear-mongering for the economists is what really made these businesses start to hold on hiring a little bit. It wasn't the actual tariffs themselves. I think it was more the fear-mongering.
No, okay, Chris.
The fear-mongering wasn't
okay, these business leaders have millions of dollars on the line often, okay? They're not going to be so stupid to let a few allegedly fear-mongering economists influence their decisions.
That's not true.
They do it because of real economic concerns. I mean, so these CEOs, they get paid millions of dollars. Their stock options can change widely depending on their success. The board of directors, they need results. They're not going to be influenced by allegedly crazy economists.
That is not true.
It's just okay.
That is not true.
No.
That is not true.
Okay, so tell me, what crazy economist was fear-mongering what companies
Jeffrey Sachs
to go back
was
in hiring?
Crazy economist Jeffrey Sachs was fear-mongering. He's a famous economist, international economist.
Fear-mongering how so?
He was saying that we're going to have I keep blanking on the word. Fuck, that's so annoying. That we were going to have, increased inflation, dramatic increase of inflation. That we're going to have shelves.
Was this before Trump took back the tariffs on China and the
Well, he never. What do you mean took him back? He kept tariffs in place. They just
the effective tariff rate after the initial liberation day, also when you include the 150% tariff on China, was 21%. Okay. He rolled back much of the tariffs on the countries, reduced them so that after all the taco actions, a month or two later, the effective tariff rate was closer to 14%.
Yeah, he kept tariffs
so
in place.
That's what I'm saying. No, but that means you're taking off tariffs, though, in terms of the effective tariff rate.
Well, what you really mean is you're making the tariffs, you're decreasing.
Fine, whatever language you want to use, you understand the concept. So obviously that's going to change.
Don't remove tax. Okay, I understand. Go ahead.
No, if you have a 50% income tax and you make it down to 25%, yeah, effectively you've decreased it / removed some of the tax. Yeah,
but decrease is a better way of putting it.
Sure, whatever. It doesn't matter to my
argument. Fair enough. I just wanted to be clear.
You can't really criticize someone's prediction if it was done right after the April 2nd tariff announcements if Trump removes nearly half of them. Was that fair, Christopher? Does that make sense?
14. That's not half.
So was this person doing
21 to 14?
Was that person's prediction done?
That's not
under
half.
the assumption that the tariff rates are going to be constant.
It's like 38%, 39%. Jeffrey Sachs.
Yes.
I think. Well, it was throughout the whole summer. So I think a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Nicholas, a lot of people are just against Nicholas. Yeah, you understand.
Okay.
Many economists, because a lot of them, they work at big think tanks, they get funded by Wall Street, they're just against tariffs because tariffs don't benefit these people. And that's okay.
Okay, tariffs don't benefit the economy.
I mean, that's fine. You can have that opinion, but
there is no evidence they've been a net positive so far, is there? Is there any evidence Trump's tariff regime has been a net positive?
Well, a couple things. One, I would not do the tariffs the way Trump has done it.
No, I get that.
But that's a point.
As they are right now, is there any evidence they've been a net positive?
On topic,
sure.
I want to acknowledge that in terms of the debate, that is a point in your favor because I don't think Kamala would have done the tariffs the way Trump
Sure.
did. And to their credit, and I think this was good. Maybe you disagree with this. The Biden-Harris administration, they kept Trump's tariffs on from his first term, and I think that was smart of them, just for our
No.
competition with China, because China is our
Again,
number
I
one
do want to get you
geopolitical
back.
economy.
Is there any
But
evidence
let me finish
of a
that.
net positive effect of
Let me
these
finish
tariffs?
that. In terms of industrial policy, first off, even economists who are not against the tariffs say it takes years to see the benefits of it. You don't build factories within 6 months. That just doesn't happen. But putting that aside, the short answer for what I care about is no, just to answer that question. There is some benefits in use of the tariffs for other things that have not to do with industrial policy in terms of foreign policy. But that's not my main argument for why I like tariffs anyway. So I'm not going to emphasize that too much. In terms of what matters, the answer to your question is no. I acknowledge that, but it does take time. And Trump certainly did not do it the way I would have done it.
Okay, well then, to the audience that's listening, this is a really good thing we can agree on. So Christopher obviously agrees with me that Kamala Harris would never have done the tariff regime that Trump has done.
Correct.
Not the total effective tariff rate, which is a lot higher now, even with all the changes, than it was a few years ago, nor would she have been so erratic about it.
Correct.
Also, I don't think she would have illegally, unconstitutionally done so many of the IEEPA tariffs as well. So what we can see then is that the tariff regime Trump has done so far has been a net negative. There is no good evidence that they've been a net positive. And they would not have happened under Kamala Harris admin. And we also can acknowledge that Kamala Harris would have been less bullish on Iran compared to Trump.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know that. I mean, the Democrat
Was Joe Biden less aggressive towards Iran than Trump was?
Well, he was, but the Democrat platform.
Kamala Harris was his VP.
Well, yeah, but she had Liz Cheney.
See.
Liz Cheney was going to be part of. I'm saying we don't. That is much harder to tell.
It's harder to tell than the tariffs.
Harder than Biden because she surrounded herself with neocons. I mean, she was campaigning with Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney's daughter. Dick Cheney is the godfather of the neocons. And the Democrat platform, which was established, which was established for Kamala Harris because she was the candidate by the time they got that. Their Democrat platform, which I don't want to put too much emphasis on because it's not that important. But their platform was very hawkish toward Iran. I mean, they did not leave attacking it on the table. Now, I will say this. I think it's less likely she would have attacked Iran during a first term for Harris, if nothing else, because politically it's so bad.
Well, she's also less of a Zionist supporter than Trump is.
She might be. I would still call her a Zionist, but
she might still be one. But you would acknowledge that she feels she had more political pressure from her base to be less pro-Israel than Trump.
I agree with that.
Yeah, well,
I agree with that.
And also, one of your arguments for why Harris would have been bad was that the Biden administration didn't do a good job, and she was a part of that administration. So that applies there. It should apply to the Iran stuff too. That logic.
My point is, I'm not a big fan of these. I've told you this before. I'm not a big fan of these because you never know what a president's going to do. I didn't think Trump would attack Iran. Sure. He campaigned heavily on not starting any. He had harsh rhetoric toward Iran. I don't want to be disingenuous, but he was always clear that.
I mean, I never thought he was as anti-war as you did.
That's fine, but he campaigned. I'm telling you how the way he campaigned.
No, I get that. He never said he wanted to attack Iran. So you never know
for sure, and he didn't start any new wars during his first term, even though there was pressure back then to go to war with Iran. So you never know. So I'm not a big fan of these conversations. What I'm saying is I'm largely basing my arguments on how Biden handled stuff because she was his vice president. That's the only point I'm making.
Well, sure,
I'm not saying that
has to bleed over into how Biden handled Iran, though.
Yeah, I'm saying it's less. I think it's less likely in a first term, but I think.
And we do know this Iran war has already harmed the American economy with higher gas prices, and it will likely show up in considerably higher inflation reports throughout the year, and it will probably depress payroll growth as well. Now, of course, that will be somewhat counteracted by the big, beautiful bill stimulus. But what that means is, instead of the big, beautiful bill having a true positive effect on some of the employment numbers, which I think it started to or is going to have, it's likely going to be canceled out by the higher gas prices.
Well, that's the other thing. Again, this is different because we didn't lose any American lives directly. So I'm not trying to equate this necessarily morally, but I do think they mishandled the Russia-Ukraine situation, which did lead to a dramatic increase in prices. And that's why we had bad inflation. Her and Biden supporting the lockdowns, which also is a big reason why we had inflation.
I mean, Trump supported it too.
Well, he did for a month, but then he said we have to start reopening the economy, and Democrats refused to reopen it for political reasons. So, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not giving Democrats a pass for it. They were the biggest reason for the COVID fuck-ups, not the Trump or the Republicans. I will harshly push back on that premise. The other thing is you want to remember with Kamala and Biden, if you look at the price increases with Russia, Ukraine, I know you reject this premise. I don't think that would have happened with Trump. And so maybe I won't emphasize that as much because we already talked about
It's
it.
okay, but yeah, I
But
disagree.
Harris also, I'm not convinced she would have extended Trump's tax cuts. I don't know if the big beautiful bill
No, I don't
version
support.
of it
I
would
don't
have been.
support the extended tax cuts. I just acknowledge that, even though I
Okay,
think
but I
they're
think that's a
negative.
bad thing for the economy. That means middle income people's taxes would have increased. Would have been one of the
So
biggest
in the short
increases in
term,
history.
what Trump did was positive because it acts as a stimulus. I don't want to deny that, which is why I brought it up. But in the long term, I think it's negative because it increases our deficit and our total debt even more. And I think eventually that could come to bite us on the ass.
If you think Kamala would have been good on the deficit, I don't know.
No, she wouldn't have been good. She would have been better.
Okay, well, we got a lot of tariff revenue.
She wouldn't have lowered.
How do you know that? She wouldn't have had all the tariff revenue.
So the tariff revenue has been about 150 billion, maybe 200 billion, depending on how you define it. Right now, it has to be paid all back because they've been
we don't know
illegal.
it's going to have to be paid back. Well, we don't know. That's going to have to be litigated.
Okay, well, some of it's going
to be paid. And not all the tariff.
Some of it's going to be paid back.
And not all. We don't know. The Supreme Court didn't say it.
Also, Christopher, if you look at the policy proposals,
and not all the tariff revenue is going to have to be paid back.
But also, if you look at the policy proposals from Kamala Harris, tax revenue still would have been higher under her, assuming that the higher taxes she advocated for would have went into effect than under Trump.
Yeah, high taxes aren't good for the economy.
Then why do you support tariffs? They're a tax on imports.
I only support tariffs when it comes to industrial policy.
I just wanted you to sit with that. You just said high taxes are bad for the economy. We have the now highest effective tariff rate,
have any taxes
since the early 20th century. Like, bro, you got to listen to yourself.
I'm not saying you shouldn't have any taxes.
Okay.
If I said the taxes, I'm saying high taxes.
Tariff rates are high right now, and they were higher even in 2025.
They were higher, yeah.
And they're still pretty high, right?
Just for, not that this matters for the conversation, I like the idea of America before the income tax, where a lot of our stuff is paid through tariffs. Okay, that's what I would like.
I don't.
That's what I would prefer. But no, I'm not saying all taxes are bad. Of course you need taxes. You got to pay for things.
Okay.
But higher taxes
you said
are
high
not
taxes
good.
are bad.
In income people, we don't.
Well, then if you think higher taxes are bad.
And I know you don't like this framing, but it's just the accurate framing. We don't directly pay for the tariffs. We don't. We directly pay for the income taxes.
Who's they? Do the American companies directly pay for them?
Sometimes American companies do. Sometimes
if they're buying the good, they
other
are.
countries will actually pay the tariff if you get it to the market. It depends, but putting that aside, we do not directly pay for it like we do an income tax or certainly a sales tax, which Kamala Harris. Well, I don't think she's supported a sales tax.
Christopher, even if first off, we know based on the data because we actually have seen. I can talk about the inflation data.
Sure.
For instance, we know the CPI was about 2.3% in April, then it became 3% in September, and then I have some PCE data. But we know there was some moderate inflation uptick.
CPI was lower in 2025 than it was in 2024, even with the tariffs.
Yeah, but if you look at when April hit, it was 2.3%. By September, it was 3%. And also, if we want to look at the PCE was 2.1% in April 2025. But by December 2025, it was 2.9%. That's nearly an increase of a whole percentage point. So if you want to, and also we know that in around, I think it was around
Nicholas,
November,
this is all marginal
the
stuff.
Trump administration
You're kind of making my point.
Removed tariffs on coffee, cocoa beans, and bananas because they were worried about affordability. So I guess what I'm saying is this idea that tariffs never raise prices or there's no evidence that there was some inflation as a consequence of the tariffs is not true. And the Trump administration themselves, through their own actions, after they were concerned about affordability messaging, reduced tariffs on many agricultural goods because they were raising prices.
Yeah, because they got shellacked in the mid.
Because the tariffs were making the prices worse.
Okay, we're running out of time, and I'm going to say my last word, then I'll give you the last word yourself.
Okay.
Because we are running out. I have other stuff I want to get to. So, and maybe we can do this again because we didn't cover as much as I wanted to, but just timing issues.
Sure.
My basic argument is even with all the problems with Trump's second term so far, and I think Trump's second term has been worse than his first term. I want to be very clear about that. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case 8 months ago, but it's certainly the case now. And things can change. I mean, Trump's still got 2.5 years left, assuming good health and no crazy impeachments and convictions. So we'll see what happens, which could happen, but we'll see what happens. I think if you look at Biden-Harris's 4 years, which is what I'm going to compare for what Harris likely would have done, because you don't know. If you look at the way they handled inflation, the way they handled international problems that led to inflation, the fact that they were so supportive of the lockdowns, the fact that Harris, I don't think, would have extended Trump's tax cuts, the fact that I don't think she really cares about industrial policy the way Trump does, and I don't like tariffs, that's just how I view it. I think even with some of the weaknesses, the idea that, and if you look at the trend of the weakening job numbers, that started under Biden Harris. It didn't start under Trump. I mean, I know you keep trying to fight away that it's just a fact. We've been seeing worse job growth over the last 3 years. That started under Biden Harris, didn't start under Trump. It didn't start with the tariffs. The tariffs, I'm not saying had no negative effect. I think they did, but it was quite marginal if you look at the overall trend. They totally mishandled the Russia-Ukraine situation, which is why it had a big spike in energy costs. When the energy goes up, the price of everything else goes up. I don't support what Trump has done with Iran, and I hope prices will go down quickly. I don't think they will. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll see. That's still, maybe Trump will get a deal, and maybe things will work out with them in Iran.
It's hard to say.
It's
There's
hard
so
to,
much
we don't know,
uncertainty.
but I'm happy to grant you that point for now. We'll see. But I just think if you compare it to the disaster, and we're not even getting to Biden, but this is about Harris. I just think overall, especially from my perspective, someone who's writing, it's not even close. And that's not even getting to DEI and all this the social issues. We were just focused on the economy for this debate. If you just look at the tax cuts are a big reason why. And also, one thing I forgot to mention is we had real wage growth this past year, which we never had under Biden, is my understanding.
That's not actually true.
I
If you
think
look
that
at
is
Biden's
true.
entire term, there was not real wage growth,
That's what I'm
particularly
saying.
because of the inflation
That's
stuff.
what I'm
If
saying.
you look at by year, we did have real wage growth by the last year.
That might be true, but okay.
Just so you know.
Okay, that may be true, but I think that's correct. That for Biden's whole presidency, he did not have
Yes,
real
but
wage
if you
growth.
say we never
And
had
I'm
it,
willing to grant you look,
Yeah.
Biden's first year, I give him mostly a pass because he inherited a very tough situation. I don't want to be unfair.
Sure.
He did unfair. That was a very tough situation. Now, he advocated for
I know we got to wrap up. I do want to make a comment.
Okay, well, just hold a second, and
Yeah.
then I'll give you the last word.
Okay.
If we had real wage growth this past year, the economy is fragile. I'm not saying there's mixed signals in Trump's economy. That's how I would put it.
Yes.
There's mixed signals. There's some strengths. Some GDP numbers were good.
Yep.
But there's some revisions that have not been so good. Inflation's been, I would say, not dramatically increased. I would say it's not dramatically increased, but prices are still high. Yeah. So it's a mixed picture, but I think overall it's trending more positive than we were with Biden Harris. So that's my argument. Now go ahead. You get the last word.
I'll try to make this reasonably quick. I forgot to mention, I should say this. One of the reasons, too, why this argument was a continuing trend, and that explains most of it in terms of the labor market especially, is that we were supposed to have some rate cuts in 2025 that we didn't get because of the Fed's concern about the tariffs. In fact, we didn't have a rate cut in July, and then Jerome Powell, this is according to CNN, as reported, was at a conference, and he was asked about the tariffs, and he was asked, listen, would you and the rest of the Fed voted for a rate cut back then? Was it not for the tariff, or were it not for the tariffs? And he said, yeah, I think that's right. I think if it wasn't for all the tariffs Trump's announced and the inflation concerns we have because of it, we probably would have cut rates earlier. And we know if we cut rates, the labor market tends to get stimulus. That's the whole point of rate cuts. It causes money. In other words, you can borrow money more cheaply. Businesses can use that to invest, to expand. So there's an assumption that my friend is smuggling in that it was destined that the rate of labor market softening was going to be consistent or the same in 2025 as it was in 2024, 2023. And some of the data doesn't support that, but even the data that does support that ostensibly doesn't work for his argument because that assumes we were not going to get rate cuts either way. And we were going to get earlier rate cuts if it were not for the tariffs. So that argument doesn't work too on that level of analysis. But putting in, I'll say the last couple of sentences, under Harris, it's not guaranteed, but we were less likely to get the Iran war, which would have been better for the economy. And it's not literally guaranteed, but it's 99.999% certain she would have not done anything like the tariff regime that Trump has done, and that would have been better for the economy. There's other stuff we could have got into. I want to respect this time, but those two things alone should be enough for anyone who's trying to be objective to reconsider if they originally thought Trump was the better economic choice back in the 2024 election. That's all I got to say.
Okay, I appreciate that. Maybe we can do another podcast focus on other topics regarding Trump compared to Harris if you're interested in that. But let's wrap this up. Thank you for listening, folks. Again, if you enjoyed this debate, we have another one with my friend Nicholas on the YouTube channel and on the podcast platform. You can check it out about Russia, Ukraine. So again, if you're please subscribe whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. I would so greatly appreciate it. And if you are listening on YouTube, like and comment again. I would again so greatly appreciate it. It helps a great deal with the algorithm. I think I'll be back for the Saturday episode. I'm going to talk about what Trump has said about Tucker, Megyn Kelly, Alex Jones, Candace Owens, the dude who thinks every chick's a guy that she doesn't like. Because I have thoughts about what this means for the conservative movement going forward. But we'll discuss that tomorrow, I think. Anyway, folks, hope you have a good rest of your day. I hope you fall in love. I hope you ask out that pretty girl or guy out. Have a great day, folks. Bye-bye.